Hi, everybody, and welcome to Genealogy Garage. I am Julie Huffman, the genealogy librarian at the Los Angeles Public Library. Genealogy Garage is our monthly program in which we feature different topics related to the world of genealogy. We are co-sponsored by our friends, the Southern California Genealogical Society and the Genealogical Society of Hispanic America, Southern California chapter, who I recently welcomed to the library and gave a tour to. Typically, this program happens the third Saturday of every month, except for August and December. And if there's anything you're interested in learning about or hearing about, just shoot me an email. My email is right here on the screen next to my name, and go ahead and send me one and tell me what you want to hear about. You can also ask to be added to my list so you can keep up with what's going on. And for today's session, though, you're going to see a link to a handout in the written description underneath this very picture that you see me talking from. It's kind of the description of the event, and you're going to have to click Show More, and then more of the text will come up, and you'll see a link to the handout right there. If you have any trouble accessing it, just send me an email, and I'll send it to you after the show. This session is being recorded and will be available to watch after the fact. We'll keep it up here on our YouTube page. So don't worry about taking too many notes. You can always go back and rewatch. If you are logged in to a YouTube account, you'll be able to type any questions you might have for a presenter in the chat box, and then I will ask them of her at the end of the show. Now, today's session is going to cover Ukrainian genealogy research. And before I introduce our presenter, I wanted to show you we have a prize to give to two lucky viewers. My pal Joe at genealogical.com, which is a online bookstore that I actually buy a lot of our genealogy material from, genealogical.com. Joe sent us two Ukrainian genealogy research at a glance guides. Now you can't see because I've got this kooky background that's making it go in and out, but it's a really neat pamphlet of all kinds of tips on how to research Ukrainian genealogy. I have two of them. So the first two people who send me an email saying they want it, I will mail it to you. Thank you, Joe, for your genealogy at a glance. They are really helpful. And now I would like to introduce our presenter, Laura Gold, president of the Jewish Genealogical Society of Los Angeles. And I'm going to bring up something here for a moment. This is the website URL for that organization, who are also our friends. She has been engaged in genealogical research since about 1995 and is a retired trial lawyer for the Office of the Attorney General. Good morning, Laura. So nice to have you here today.
Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here on Saturday. Well, I'm going to talk about researching genealogy roots from Ukraine, because that is where my father's family is from. And actually, my father was born in Ukraine when it was the Russian Empire. And people might think because records are old and they're at war, records are not available. Yes, there are Ukraine records, as you can see in this slide. Census records, recruitment lists, you name it, they have it. But Ukraine is at war, and this may affect your ability to actually get records or go to Ukraine right now. I wouldn't recommend a trip there. At the end of the war, I definitely do recommend traveling to your ancestral hometowns. The slide on the left shows the area in the east that is under Russian control. And I can't speak to what's happening to the archives there. The rest of Ukraine, I will talk about the preservation of records. The slide on the right shows the battle areas in the Kyiv region. These slides are not up to date in the sense that I didn't get them from last week. You have to follow the news to know exactly where the battles are, but Kyiv has been under attack. My family is from the western part of Ukraine, and that's an area that's relatively free of impact from the war. And I'm going to talk about records in the Lviv area because there are a lot of records online. My family is not from Lviv. Of course, you need to find out where your family is from. What is happening in terms of preserving archival records? Now, this is a picture from 2017. The war was not impacting Odessa at that time, and this gives you an idea of what the archive in Odessa looks like. It's in an old synagogue, surprisingly. There is a charity account that's been established to support the archive preservation of records, and if you go online, there's a YouTube with an interview from an archivist, and she explains the kinds of preservation they're doing now, the units where they're able to put really important documents of historic significance, maybe not the genealogically significant documents. Ukrainian archive officials are working with international agencies and organizations to better secure our records. And to give you an idea of what's happening, 20 fire-resistant cabinets arrived from the Federal Archives of Germany, the State Archives of Bavaria, the Ukrainian Art Aid Center in Germany, and the German Ukrainian Society. Records are getting digitized, probably as we speak. Jewish Gen Ukraine Research Division is digitizing, and the goal was approximately 1 million records by the summer of 2023. The status of the digitization will be reported at the International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies in London the first week of August. I am going to that conference and have planned to attend the meeting, the presentation by Jewish Gen Ukraine Research Division to find out the status of their digitizing. According to the internet, Jewish Gen Ukraine Research Division transcribes, digitizes, and uploads some 150,000 records each month to the searchable Jewish Gen website. That website, while they say it's searchable, I've had great difficulty in searching for records. My understanding is that indexes have been prepared that are in English, so you can search your name or your town in English, but the records are not all put into English. I don't speak Russian or Ukrainian. I don't read Cyrillic, and my recommendation is get an expert from Ukraine to obtain records and translate those records. A lot easier than struggling with the Ukrainian and Russian language with Cyrillic. But before you start, here's another. We went to the archive with a Ukrainian genealogist. I mean, he led us on our trip. And what we're looking at in this slide is the index of birth records. And I was looking for my aunt and uncle's birth records, which we found. And you'll see my uncle's record in a little bit later. Here's a map of Ukraine. And you want to know what region your family is from. You want to identify the town that they lived in and the town that they came from and towns in the general area. This is a World War II German map because names change and you want to see what it looked like back if you're researching the Holocaust, what did it look like? I was interested in rail lines because I wanted to know how my family traveled from Kamenets-Podolsk, which is somewhat prominent on the lower left side of this map, to Odessa. You would be surprised to know that a whole set of World War II German maps are at the Cal State Northridge Library in the geography department section of the library, and there is a map librarian who can help you find the maps that are of the towns where your family's from. They can duplicate them, the map that you will get duplicated will look exactly like the original. You may ask, how in the world did Cal State Northridge end up with these maps? The U.S. Army, when they won the war and they passed through Germany, they found 2 sets of German Army maps. They went to the Library of Congress, and the Library of Congress only needed 1 set. So they were put up for sale. And this was way back when Cal State Northridge was San Fernando Valley State College, much smaller than it is today. And the geography department saw that, and they bought these maps for, I understand, a very inexpensive price. And that's why there is an archive right here in the San Fernando Valley. Starting your research, you have 2 questions to ask. What is my name, and where am I from? Because family names have changed in the United States, and the name that you think is your family name may not be the name that you want to search in those Ukrainian records. This photograph my father had, he is the oldest boy in this picture, and his brother and sister are the young children. You want to look for those photographs. They will give you clues as to where your family lived. There might be an indication on the photograph as to where it was taken. So if it was taken in a big city like Odessa or Lviv, that was maybe reflected on these photographs. So you want to look for any clue from any record that your family may have kept. Citizen records are, I think, the best source to find out where the family came from. This is a declaration of intention of my grandfather. I got this right off the internet through Ancestry.com. It says I was born Podol, Russia. That's abbreviation for Podolia. That is a region, not a shtetl or town or city. It's in Kamenets-Podolsk, which would be the capital of that gubernia, that area. And then it has foreign residence was Odessa. So that is the city he was living in before he emigrated to the United States. Wonderful information from the citizenship. If your citizenship records are not found by the internet, you can contact the National Archives. They have a genealogy website. It's very hard to navigate. It takes them a lot of time to get you records. And I ordered records at the start of COVID, and I think I got them a month or 2 ago on a CD-ROM. They're not the most up-to-date. Ship manifests are excellent sources to find out where the family is from. This I ordered from the Ellis Island website early on when they first had records. There's the Steve Morris one-step research for manifests. Your family may have come through other ports of entry. Not everybody came through Ellis Island. My family did. So this is the ship manifest of my father's entry. And my father came in 1914, and it says his last permanent residence was Odessa. And I know that this is him because it matched all the information. It has his father's name, Gershon Goldenberg, and then it has place of birth, Shatava. If I didn't know that he was born in this town, the shtetl of Shatava, this is critical information. Let me know the town that he was born in. He was obviously alive when I was a child, well into my adulthood, and he talked a lot about Shatava. People, your people, may have brought documents with them. The document on the left is a notarized, legal-sized document confirming where my grandfather worked in 1914. He got this, I suspect, to prove to immigration authorities that he was employable. He was somebody who had a job. And if he had a job in Odessa, he could have a job in the United States. I'm putting two and two together since he died when I was, I don't know, 3 years old and lived in New York. This document is in Ukrainian, not in Russian. And I was able to get it translated from somebody at work who was born in Ukraine. The verification of work is one thing. I also had information as to where they lived in Odessa. My father went back during the Soviet time in the 1970s and had taken a photograph and had recorded the street where the apartment house was that they lived. I went to Odessa with my brother. He had the photograph, and he had also traveled in 1975. So this is the building in the back. It's not a wealthy country, as you can see. This is how people live, and Odessa is a big, beautiful city. We went to Shatava. Again, I had an old photograph of the home. I knew that the house was on the main highway through town and that it was across the street from the synagogue. And I had a picture of what the synagogue building looked like. The well on the left is the well in the backyard of my father's home. The building that was the synagogue, how appropriate. It is now the library. I assumed that the library would have photographs of what Shatava looked like early on, that it would have genealogical information. No, they had not a single photograph of what the town looked like during World War II, what it looked like before. And the head librarian, did not even know that that building had been the Jewish synagogue and that there was a substantial Jewish population in this nothing little town. There was one restaurant there. At least it had a decent restroom and we could eat. The outhouse at the library was another matter. Okay, this is what my paternal family's home looked like back when they lived there. Because when my father went in 1974 and took this photograph, this is what the house, he said, this is what it looked like when he lived there. And you can see it's a pretty substantial house. When I went there, it had been completely modernized, but the structure was the same. There were additions in the back. The kitchen looked like the kitchen when my father lived there, and he was born in 1897. It still had the Russian stove, but I edited my photographs because I've got a lot of records to show you. Here is a birth record of my uncle that I got in the Odessa archive. This is digitized. I took a picture from the computer screen. And what is interesting about this record is it reveals the town that they came from, because they were considered residents of Shatava, even though they had lived in Odessa for many, many years. And my grandfather worked in Odessa. The Russian government tied people to their little towns. This record is in cursive Russian and cursive Hebrew on the bottom. The date stamp on the left, 1913, that's when this record was pulled because the family applied for passports to come to the United States. And I never would have known that if I hadn't gone to the archive with a genealogist who helped us get the records, because obviously he spoke Russian and Ukrainian, and he said that's what the stamp means. You learn a lot if you connect up with a local genealogist. Another example of citizenship records revealing the hometown in Ukraine. This record, petition for citizenship, which I don't remember if I got online or I ordered it, because I did both. My last foreign residence was Narodich, State of Russia, and the Republic of Poland. It's now in Ukrainian, called Norodici, and I'm going to talk a lot about this town because you want to research these towns, everything about them, their past history and the present, to learn about your ancestral towns. These towns changed hands, if you will. Norodich was Russian Empire. Then it was the Republic of Poland between the wars. It then became part of the USSR, and it's Norodici in the country that is now Ukraine, still Ukraine. Lvov in Ukraine. But let's suppose your ancestor said, well, our family is from Lemberg. And you think, where's Lemberg? It's not a city now in Ukraine. It's because it was Lemberg when it was Austria. Be open to the fact that your ancestral home may have gone by many different names and been in many different countries without having moved at all. So Lviv was in Poland, Austria, Ukraine, Soviet Union, Germany, Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic under the USSR, and now Ukraine. These photographs, you can get photographs like this online, which is where I did, a very European city, very Austrian, a beautiful city, and in a relatively safe area because it's on the far western side. My grandmother is from a town, Frampol, but Frampol no longer exists. It is now called Kozygurka. And I couldn't find Frampol because, present day maps don't show it. But the genealogist who I was working with said, oh, it's now Kozygurka. And we were able to go there. And this is the cemetery. We had a very interesting experience. I'll talk about it more later. Here is the city of Kowal, Poland. It was Poland when my father-in-law was born. This is my husband's grandfather's petition for naturalization. This was online because records for people who went to Chicago seem to be more accessible. And I just point out here that between the wars, Kowal was Poland, and before it was the Russian Empire, then it was the Soviet Union, and people were learning all these different languages. First they were speaking Russian, Polish, I don't know what my father-in-law did speak Polish, and of course Yiddish. My father spoke Russian, Ukrainian, I think he studied French in school, which was the international language. But at any rate, here's another record that revealed the town. So I've talked about identifying the town. Now I'm going to talk about what was the name in the old country. The name Stone just didn't sound like a Eastern European name. And so I started researching the citizenship. These are federal name court records, federal index cards. When the person applied for their citizenship, that's all federal court, and they choose their name. And so Mortuck Bar Stotland became Max Stone, and Moja Stothland became Maurice Stone. Now they are related. I don't remember if they were brothers or cousins, but they, you could see they lived together in the same household, but they're spelling the last name differently. And we in the United States are really hung up over spelling. I've heard people say, well, that last name is spelled differently. That's not my family. These people spoke Russian and Yiddish. They knew Cyrillic and Yiddish Hebrew letters. They didn't know English Latin letters. They knew how the name sounded, and as you pronounce the name Stothland, it could be spelled different ways. I'm giving you two examples, but there were many other variations from the exact same family. I connected them all up together. So be open to the spelling of your name and searching the name with various spellings. But here I knew that this is the family name, Stockland. And so I want to research that town where they're from, Norodici, Norodich, whatever. And I did go in with a group of people from that town. You want to connect up with people researching that town, because then you can hire a local genealogist, which will cost you less, and get records. Names changed when the country changed. And here's an example of a change from the Russian to the Polish to the Americanized name. The certificate of arrival, this was the name that was on their passports. It was the name on the manifest when they came through Ellis Island, Zezba Radomilska, and he never went by that name. But because the country was Poland, Poland put a Polish variation of his name. The name was Radomyzelski, as shown in the Declaration of Intention, where he's going by his Americanized first name, Lester Radomyzelski. But when he petitions for his new American name, Lester Radom, he has to sign it with the same name that he came in on, which was the Zezba Radomilska. And by the way, Lester Radom was not the name at Ellis Island, and no names were changed at Ellis Island. They're changed through the citizenship process, and here is the naturalization of that new name, Lester Radom. Jewish Gen is where you want to go if you are researching your roots, wherever your roots are. And this is a good source, even if you're not Jewish, because there are records that are in Jewish Gen. There are articles about your town. The articles will focus on the Jews of the town, but they're going to tell you about the town. So it's still a resource, whether you're Jewish or you're Ukrainian. Here's the type of resource from Jewish Gen Kahila links, and this has links to Odessa records, and it gives you information about the archives. This is somewhat up to date, as you can see, April 2023. Although I have to tell you, when I clicked on the links, I didn't get anything. I don't know what the problem is, and I'm going to go to the class at the conference that Jewish Gen offers to say, why am I not successful? I was successful on records from Belarus years ago, but I didn't get these Odessa records. And I don't know what the problem is. It's not the easiest website to negotiate, but there is a lot of information. And it's a way of finding researchers who are researching your family name and your town. And I, right off the bat, when I didn't know what I was doing and I was just clicking, I found someone researching my family in Belarus. And between his research and my research, we pretty much put the whole story together. So Jewish Gen is a fantastic research. If your family is from the Galicia region, then you want to belong to Gesher Galicia. And I would suggest, whether you're Jewish or Ukrainian, there are going to be records there, and they are digitized. They are in English. I have not done research using Gesher Galicia because my family is not from there. But this gives you a kind of an idea of the incredible amount of records. Because the area was Austrian, there are Austrian records, and those are going to be in German. There are change of name records, small companies, licenses for production and sale of alcohol. And you might wonder, why would this be on Gesher Galicia? Jews were the only ones who had licenses for the production and sale of alcohol. Christians could not engage in that business. It was a very important business for Jews who were small business people, and that carried over in the United States because they came here and they got involved in alcohol production, Schenley liquor, the Bronfmans, and also running taverns and bars. This is just a little touch of what they have, because I start with the B's of the towns and go through part of the C's, but it goes through the whole alphabet. So all the towns are in Gesher Galicia. It kind of gives you an idea of the types of records. Franciscan survey. I think that's going to include Christian records, not just Jewish records. Jewish deaths, that's definitely Jewish. Marriages, landowners. Do you have any landowners? Taxpayers. Census records, voting records, school records, applications for passports. That's going to apply to Jews and Christians alike. So if you come from that eastern, or rather the western side in Galicia, you're in luck. In the Jewish Gen website, you can click for these links to the records. You can search the inventories, the archives. And because it is an area that was also in Poland, there are records in Warsaw. I would suggest JRI Poland to get those Polish records. And you can research that now, war notwithstanding. If you belong to Gesher Galicia, you get either a hard copy or online the Galicianer. It's a kind of a little magazine publication. People write about their families. They write about all kinds of things. Wonderful resource. I found in doing my preparation for this talk that there's, and I don't know how to pronounce it, but Rohaitin, I would think, Jewish Heritage. This is a group who is researching the Jewish history of this town. They are preserving the cemeteries. They are preserving the headstones, and they are working on derelict old synagogues and working on getting the headstones put into the synagogues and making the synagogues museums. The headstones on the ground there, that was a road. I found on the internet a lot of pictures of the roads, and I saw roads that had, and sidewalks paved with cemetery headstones, because the Soviets said, the Jews are all gone. They were all killed in the Holocaust. No need for those headstones. We're going to use them to pave our roads and pave our sidewalks. And on the fall of the Soviet Union, it took the fall of the Soviet Union for Jewish groups to be able to go in and start collecting and preserving their family headstones. And you can see a picture here of the volunteers who go out there in the summer, war notwithstanding. They are working to preserve those headstones. And then, of course, trying to get information from the headstones so that people can search and find information about their families. And here's a picture of I don't have to watch my time, the Hebrew school kindergarten class of 1937. Now, if you know that you have a relative who was in that age group from that town, you might find a picture of them from this kindergarten class, and there may be, I assume, other classes. I have not reviewed the Yisker book for this town. Yisker books are tremendous resources, and you may find a description of a family member. You may find a photograph of a family member. You have no idea when you can come on and discover something. I'm going to tell a story that came up not through genealogy, but because there was a documentary movie that came out about a man who was in a concentration camp, and he had a violin, and the violin went to a student in New York. A long story. And they had film footage of this man after he was released from the camp in a displaced persons camp. And so we thought this would be something a friend of ours who is a Holocaust survivor, still alive, she might appreciate watching it because she had been in a displaced persons camp. So we sent her the link, and she watched it. And oh my goodness, she called us right away. She was in the footage. She was standing not very far from this man, and there she was as a schoolgirl, and she was in that camp. You never know when you can find information. So just get out there and search. I mentioned earlier the importance of putting your name on Jewish Gen, researching a particular family name and a particular town. I was able to connect up with a man in Moscow. My grandmother's maiden name from Frampol is Berezover. And this man was descended from Berezovers. There are some Berezovers in Moscow now. All the Berezovers are from this town of Frampol and had come from Moldova before that. And he had visited in 2013 and he found a headstone. We visited in 2017. I didn't know where to look. He must have known. And so I got a headstone of someone that's connected to my family name. We went to the cemetery in Shatava. This is my brother looking through the cemetery. The stones were such that it was impossible to find any family members. The cemetery is not in very good shape. The town has a memorial. This was a memorial that was erected well before the fall of the Soviet Union. My parents went there in 1974. And when they were there was actually a plaque. I think it was bronze. So I do have an old picture that shows the plaque, but it has been vandalized. There's nothing on it. My brother was there in 1975 and the plaque was there. It's out in the middle of a farm field. You wouldn't know it's there. We had to ask people in the town to point us in the direction. And we went down this dirt road and then we had to walk quite a ways out in the middle of the field to get to this Holocaust memorial. There's a lot of information online about every town, what happened to the Jewish population, a lot of detail. And some of it is posted on Jewish Gen, some of it is just posted on the internet. But the typical story there is these people didn't go to concentration camps. They were all herded out, marched out to fields. Sometimes it's forests, and they were just shot en masse. In Frampol, we found an older woman who knew the history of the town, and she got in our car. She pointed out the significant sites. The community center was the former synagogue, and it had just recently been redone. The former Jewish school, we would never have known, but she said this was the Jewish school. It was a town that had a lot of rabbinic education. And then the war memorial, very typical of the war memorials in Ukraine and in Belarus as well. They're very Soviet, muscular. They don't say anything about the local population. So there's nothing Jewish about these war memorials. There's nothing Ukrainian about these war memorials. These are communist Soviet memorials. We went to Norodici, and as we drove through, there were very few homes occupied. And we thought, this looks bizarre. This is an abandoned town. What has happened? Well, we did know that it was not far from Chernobyl, I think about 20 miles. We did not go to the Atomic Chernobyl Catastrophe Museum. But when I got home, I did my research. And on the the attachment, there's an excellent book that describes what happened to the town, how the Soviets covered it up. People were not evacuated. They were having cancer. There were, animals with two heads, all kinds of birth defects, horrible birth defects amongst the animals and people. And this town and this whole region did not get evacuated until the fall of the Soviet Union. I think that that's important information to know if you have a town that's in the area impacted by Chernobyl, and if you had family who stayed and were impacted by the Soviet communist mentality. Okay, my politics are showing, but it's no surprise that the Ukrainians hate the Russians. We went to the cemetery in Norodici, and people, are still getting buried there. And the same was true, by the way, in Frumpole. The woman who took us around, she was a teacher, a math teacher, and the principal of her school was Jewish. So there were Jews who survived and stayed, could not practice their religion in Ukraine after World War II because of the Soviets. But the Christians couldn't practice their religion either. And that's another story for research if you are a Christian Ukrainian. The churches were destroyed, not just the synagogues. We went to Kovel, which was a major railroad hub between Ukraine and Poland. When you do go, you have access to pictures that you may not have online, and the Jews who have ancestors from Kovel have saved a lot of pictures, and they were posted. The hotel we were staying at, and it wasn't an elaborate hotel, had a hallway with old pictures from the town. So here you see the synagogue. It is now a clothing manufacturing concern. There are pictures in Kovel, but also on the internet, that show what life was like before Hitler came through the city. Kovel is a city. You can see here is I think it's a pharmacy, a Jewish pharmacy. If you have a chance to travel, you want to look for Jewish pharmacies, because there's a whole history. Jews were involved in alcohol, but the Jews were the pharmacists. And we found a number of Jewish pharmacies, some of which the families have returned and made little kind of little museums. We saw that in Belarus. It was so touching. But this is what happened to the Kovel Jewish community after Hitler. They were all marched out to the forest and shot. And these are the areas where their bones were found. Upon the fall of the Soviet Union, this memorial was established, and there are the stories all written up in part of the memorial, where it tells the whole story of what happened to the people, with photographs of the community. And you see that this was a rather modern community, and people, you had secular and you had religious, and they had a life. They were real people, and it was quite touching. Lviv is a beautiful city, as you can see, very Austrian architecture. In Lviv, there are the remnants of the synagogue that was destroyed in 1942. If you are Christian Ukrainian, you want to research the churches that were destroyed, or what happened to the churches in the meantime. Some churches were rebuilt. I mean, the Soviets dynamited churches, but the Nazis destroyed the synagogues. And I thought I would end the program with the final chapter, if you will, of a Christian memorial and a Jewish memorial. So I have one more slide. The Holodomor in Ukraine. This is in Frumpole, and there was an interesting story that the woman who lived there told us, that in Frumpole, the Holodomor, the planned, legislated implemented forced starvation of the Ukrainian farmers. In Frampol, the Jews had the little shops along the highway, and they had canned food, and they had food that was not the wheat and the farm goods. And so they fed the Christians in Frampol. And you don't hear that story. It was this, when the woman told us the story, she had tears in her eyes. She was crying because her family survived the Holodomor because of the Jews of this town. And she was the one who was a teacher, and the principal of her school was Jewish. We often, as Jews, hear the story about how the Ukrainians shot Jews, and it wasn't just the Nazis. And that is a true story, because the enemy of your enemy is your friend. They saw the Germans as liberating them from Stalin, the communists who starved them to death. The history of the relationship between Jews and Christians is a very complicated history. As it is for the Christian community to learn about the Holocaust and the Nazis. So I'm going to end with Babi Yar, probably the most well-known and significant memorial for the Holocaust, because the Russians bombed this area. They did not destroy this part of the main part of the memorial, but there was the building of a museum, and the missile hit and the museum burned. It's Lviv, or not Lviv, the capital is under attack, and Kyiv, not Lviv, Kyiv, the capital is under attack, and it even impacted an important memorial, which, by the way, this memorial was not erected until the fall of the Soviet Union. Learning about the Soviet times is an important part of the story of Ukraine. If you have family members who lived more into the modern time, post World War II, it's important to know, but even before the war, why were people leaving when it was the Russian Empire? Why did they leave when it was the Soviet Union? And I think that's my last slide. So I think we've got plenty of time for questions, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do to exit.
Don't worry about it. I've got that under control. So now what we can do is just you and me on the screen, and we can take some questions. And I have some questions too for you, Laura. And one thing that's really fascinated me, I took a trip to the American Jewish University a couple years ago, and their librarian showed me their collection of Yitzhak books. But
Silverman, the library, right? Which is my mother's name. Yes. Is that
yes.
the librarian? Her last name is Silverman.
I don't know if it was her.
Oh.
But anyway, but I was so fascinated by them. That was the first time I'd ever known of Yitzhak books in existence. And I'm wondering if some of our viewers might not know exactly what those are, if you could maybe explain them a little.
Yeah, could I stop share? I'm afraid to click on the exit from my slides, but is there some way I can do that? So that
go ahead, and I've got your presentation in the background, but you can
I'm going to
just
exit out.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, wait a minute. I'm still seeing my slides, and I'm not seeing me.
Well, you're there. Do you want to just talk to the camera?
I'll just talk to the camera. Okay, so I hope the camera can see. I came prepared with a Yitzhak book in Ukraine. Is the camera showing this?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about Yitzhak. This is one for the Kamenets Podolsk and its environs, which I talked about. these books were typically written in Yiddish or Hebrew. Many have been translated into English. People who survived the Holocaust or left just before wrote articles about the town that they were from. So this book happens to have Frumpel, which is why I wanted, and it has an article on Podolia, the general area. And I'm going to turn through here. It has a general article on Frumpel. It has personalities, Dr. Yaakov Hoffman, and I have seen, actually, AJU, there's the Yisker book from the city in Belarus where my grandmother was from. Some Yisker books are very large. They have tremendous information. Some of them have photographs, and I did see a photograph that had a family name. I haven't connected him up, but, and I have a Yisker book that has a poem written by one of my ancestors who did get to the United States. And it was interesting where you see, if you find one of your ancestors who did something, had a career. So here, this man was a poet. His son became a professor of literature at NYU, won a Pulitzer Prize for the definitive book on Cotton Mather, how a Jewish professor wrote about Cotton Mather, I don't know, but and then the next generation, a French literature professor at, I think, Penn. So you kind of track these occupations, but it started with a poem that came into a Yisker book. So they're very great resources.
We do have a question from a viewer, and I'm going to bring it up on the screen. She's wondering, how did you find, he or she is wondering, how did you find local genealogists in Europe? And would they spend the whole day with you? And did they speak English?
Okay, you definitely want someone who speaks English, of course. I go to the International Jewish Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies, and I saw Alex Dunai. I knew the woman who at the time was vice president of programming for JGSLA, and she was working on Galicia, and that he lives in Lviv. So she was working with him, and I got him that way. I went to a conference and ran into people who were researching Norodici, and that was my husband's family. And I did see the woman was at the conference. So there are people who go to conferences. Google genealogical Ukrainian researchers. You might find them because they're looking for customers. I think there is a Ukraine genealogical society in New Jersey. I was going to go to one of their conferences, but then COVID hit. They would have researchers, but Google, that's how you Google Ukraine genealogy researchers.
Once I found a presenter for this show using Jewish Gen, could you possibly find someone to help on Jewish Gen? Are there like bulletin boards? I think that's how I found my presenter. Do you know?
Yes, there are town leaders. So if you research your town and you see a town leader, send an email through Jewish Gen to the town leader and say, this is what you're looking for. They may be able to make a recommendation. If you want to send me an email, you can find my email by Googling JGSLA or Jewish Genealogy Los Angeles, and it has a president. Any email that goes to President JGSLA will come to me, and I can make recommendations probably, in the next couple of weeks, but then I'm going to the conference and I'm going to be traveling through England for 3 weeks. So I won't be getting information, but I can provide the names of, I think, 3. I've used 2, but I've used 2 researchers. Alex Dunai, I set up travel through him. So he arranged all the hotels, a driver with a minivan. The more people you have in the minivan, the less expensive it's going to be, but it's not as expensive as going with a big American company. And he would just drive through town. I gave him all the information, all the towns and the names I was researching. And he'd drive through town and he'd say, where's the oldest person in town? And then he'd drive up. And sometimes, well, one place we contacted the mayor of the city, and he took us around. And it was translated by our guide. When I traveled in Belarus, I went through Mir, which is an American company that specializes in Asia and Eastern Europe. We didn't have a genealogist guide, but we went to all the towns. We went to the local little Jewish museums. So we talked to people. We got a lot of information. We were not able to go to an archive, but we went to the library in Minsk and met with the librarian, and were able to access on the computer photographs of the cities and towns, which was very helpful. So there are different ways to go, but people speak English, and the genealogists definitely do. Some of them, their English is not as good as others. Alex Dunai, very good, and his wife.
It sounds like you just kind of found a lot of local help too, just by going up to people and talking to them. You had, and I think people are pretty friendly and excited to show their towns. So if you can just like reach in and get that extrovert out of you, you might find some help just locally too, once you're there.
Exactly. And going to the archive, I would recommend having an appointment, which we didn't when we went in Odessa, but we got in all right. Sometimes you may want to make an appointment, and even Ukraine has this kind of communist bureaucracy idea. I tried to make an appointment for an archive in Uzbekistan. I don't know, it's a different region. And I was working through our tour person for more than a month. And then we were there for 3 weeks. And I got permission to go to the archive on the day that we were getting on the plane to go home. And there was no reason for this kind of delay. So you have to expect difficulty, because they've got this bureaucracy, even in Ukraine, even being anti-Russian.
One last question from me, actually. I have heard, and I've not done this myself yet, but that there are Facebook groups sometimes that can help you translate documents you might find if you maybe just scan and post it on a Facebook group. Have you ever used that to help you with documents that you can't read?
I have not, but I am on a Jewish Ukraine Facebook group, and I cut and paste information. In fact, the information about that town where they're preserving the cemeteries, and I got that information from a posting on the Facebook group. The person who heads that up, who is a lawyer from California, and she moved to Ukraine with her husband, who also has a PhD, and they had all kinds of pictures of what they're doing in information. Facebook groups are wonderful, and I don't recall how I got onto that Facebook group, but people do get translation of documents. They post whatever their questions are. They post photographs. They post. Oops, my computer went into sleep mode. Yeah, get on a Facebook group, the Ukraine Facebook group. And one of these days, I think I want to reach out to the group in New Jersey, because I think it would have been fun to go to their conference and see what they're doing on the Christian side.
Roberta has a comment about what we were just talking about. She says there are quite a few Eastern European. Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Well, Laura, I think that is just about it. I have lots of people saying that they've enjoyed you, and I certainly have. It's been fascinating seeing your adventures, and we all are in support of Ukraine, coming through this trying time, and that maybe we could visit there again. And will you probably visit again after the war ends?
I don't know. I have a lot of places to visit, but I would definitely consider it, and I want to find out what's happening at the conference in terms of getting more information. It would be, I think, valuable to get the information from the Kamenets-Podolsk area. The archive there burned, and the records suffered badly, both from the fire and the water. And I think that is now available. I would be interested to go to that archive. And I certainly encourage anyone viewing this program to plan to go when it's safe.
Well, thanks so much for spending your day with us. And thanks to all of you out there watching. And tell your friends about this. As I mentioned, this is recorded and will be available to watch after we hang up. So if you have friends who you think might have enjoyed this but weren't able to watch, let them know to come to our YouTube page. And Laura, have a wonderful day. And thank you so much for the generosity of your time.
And thank you for inviting me. This was a lot of fun.
My pleasure.